People say a son never forgets his mother. That's something people with full houses say. People who've never sat alone in a quiet apartment, holding a phone that doesn't ring anymore. I didn't lose my son to death. There was no hospital room, no funeral. I lost him to a wedding, to white lights, to champagne glasses, to a new last name that slowly erased mine. The day my son got married, I stood at the edge of the room, smiling, clapping, alive, and became a stranger. My name is Margaret Collins. I was poor before I ever knew what the word meant. I became poorer when my husband died. Daniel Collins, my husband, was killed in a construction accident when our son Ethan was 6 years old. One phone call, one apologetic voice, one sentence that split my life in half. After that, the world didn't slow down for me. Bills still came, rent still rose, and grief had no value in dollars. So I worked. I cleaned offices at night, waited tables on weekends, took whatever shifts paid in cash. Every dollar went toward one thing: making sure my son never felt how close we were to the edge. Ethan grew up watching me come home exhausted. He learned early not to ask for toys, not to complain, not to need too much. "Mom," he used to say, "when I grow up, you won't have to work anymore." I believed him. That promise carried me through years of back pain, through skipped meals, through nights when the power went out and I pretended it was an adventure. I raised him alone. The world called him self-made. Ethan was smart. Scholarships, a degree, an office job with glass walls and the quiet authority. People praised him for his discipline. No one asked who packed his lunches or who worked double shifts to keep the internet on. That's fine. Mothers don't raise children for credit. We raise them for closeness. Her name was Lauren, polite, educated, from a family that spoke comfortably about vacations and investments. At the engagement dinner, Lauren hugged me briefly, the kind of hug that ends before it starts. Ethan barely noticed. He was learning a new language, how to belong somewhere else. At the wedding, I sat in the second row, close enough to smile for photos, far enough to be forgotten afterward. The changes came quietly. Shorter phone calls, delayed replies, then silence disguised as busyness. When I visited, Lauren stayed upstairs. He said, "Mom, maybe it's better if you call before coming." Call, as if I hadn't built his entire life without an invitation. One afternoon, I waited outside Ethan's office building. I hadn't seen him in months. When he spotted me, his face didn't light up. It tightened. "Mom, why didn't you text?" "I wanted to surprise you," I said, gripping my purse. He glanced around. His coworkers were nearby. "I'm in the middle of something," he said. "I'll come by later." He never did. That night, sitting alone in my small apartment, I finally understood something no mother is prepared for. I didn't lose my son. He chose a life where I no longer fit. A mother doesn't scream when her son leaves. She sits quietly, replaying every sacrifice, every promise. Every night she prayed over a sleeping child and wonders which part of loving him made her so easy to abandon. I didn't beg. I didn't blame. I just sat there in the silence he left behind and learned what it feels like. Margaret's hands started shaking before she noticed the pain. At first, it was small things, a coffee mug slipping from her fingers, buttons taking longer to fasten, her knees aching when she climbed the stairs to her apartment. She told herself it was age, then weather, then stress. Poor people always explain pain away. Doctors are expensive. Time off work is dangerous. So Margaret kept going. She cleaned offices with swollen joints. She served food with fingers that went numb mid-shift. At night, she soaked her hands in warm water and whispered, "Just a little longer." She didn't know what she was waiting for anymore, only that stopping felt like disappearing. The doctor spoke gently. Chronic autoimmune disease. Progressive, manageable, but not curable. "Do you have family support?" he asked, pen hovering above the clipboard. Margaret hesitated. "Yes," she said. The word felt heavy, like a lie that had grown old. She texted Ethan from the bus stop outside the clinic. "Doctor says I'm sick. Nothing urgent. Just wanted you to know." 3 hours passed. Then 6. That night, a reply arrived. "Sorry, Mom. Long day. We'll talk later." They never did. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't insult her. That would have hurt less. Instead, he forgot. Forgot appointments, forgot birthdays, forgot to ask how she was doing after saying he would. When Margaret mentioned her medication costs, he said, "Have you looked into assistance programs?" When she said she felt weak lately, he said, "You should try staying active." When she finally said, "I could really use your help," he replied, "Mom, I can't put my life on hold." She didn't ask him to. She just wanted to be remembered. Lauren never raised her voice. She didn't have to. At first, she sent polite texts. "Hope you're feeling better. Let us know if you need anything." But when Margaret did ask, for a ride to the pharmacy, for help setting up online medical forms, the replies changed. "This week is really hectic. Maybe next time. We're trying to focus on our own family right now." Family. Margaret learned quickly what that word no longer included. During one visit, Lauren offered her tea but forgot the sugar, even though Margaret had taken it sweet for 20 years. "Oh, sorry," Lauren said lightly. "I forgot." She forgot a lot, especially Margaret. As Margaret's illness worsened, so did her isolation. Neighbors stopped knocking. Coworkers replaced her shifts without asking. The world kept moving. One afternoon, she overheard 2 women in the apartment hallway. "You should really move on," one said. "Your son has his own life." Move on? From what? From motherhood? From sacrifice? From the one role she had lived for? At church, a woman squeezed her hand and whispered, "You did your job. Now it's time to let go." She smiled. She had become very good at smiling. Margaret sat on her bed one evening, phone in hand. She'd typed Ethan's number, deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again. She realized something terrifying in that moment. Every call she made felt like begging, and she had begged enough in her life. So she set the phone down. She didn't announce her decision. She didn't threaten silence. She simply stopped reaching out. And no one noticed. A mother doesn't stop loving her child. She just stops bleeding where no one comes to help. Margaret lay in bed that night, joints aching, ceiling spinning slowly above her. She thought of Ethan as a boy, his small hand wrapped around her finger, his voice calling for her in the dark. She wondered when that boy learned how to live without ever looking back. And somewhere deep inside her, a dangerous thought began to form. Not anger, not revenge, but the understanding that when the world decides you no longer matter, you are free to disappear on your own terms. Margaret lost her job on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. No argument. No accusation. Her manager called her into the small office behind the kitchen. "We've noticed you've been missing shifts," he said carefully. "And when you're here, you seem unwell." Margaret nodded. She had learned not to defend herself. Defenses cost energy. "We can't keep the position open," he added, "but you were a great employee." Great employees are replaceable. People with nowhere to go are not. The unemployment office smelled like old paper and desperation. Margaret sat between a young man scrolling his phone and an older woman crying silently into a tissue. When her number was called, she stood too quickly. The room tilted. Her vision darkened at the edges. She gripped the counter until the world settled again. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the clerk asked. "Yes," Margaret said. She always said yes. That night, she opened her mail. Past due notices, medical bills, a final warning from her landlord. She stared at Ethan's name on her phone. Didn't press it. The pain started in her chest just after midnight. Not sharp, heavy, like something was sitting on her lungs. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly like she'd seen on television. She told herself it would pass. It didn't. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She called Ethan. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted, "I'm not feeling well. Can you call me?" She waited. 10 minutes, 20. She considered calling an ambulance. Then she thought of the bill. She lay back down instead. Poor people make calculations that rich people never have to imagine. Margaret woke up on the floor. She didn't remember falling. Her cheek was pressed against the cold wood. Sunlight crept through the blinds, indifferent. Her phone lay a few feet away. No missed calls, no messages. She dragged herself to the couch and sat there for hours, wrapped in a blanket, shivering though the room was warm. In the afternoon, Ethan finally texted, "Sorry, Mom. Busy day yesterday. Everything okay?" Margaret stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she locked the phone. Everything was not okay, but she was tired of explaining. Days passed, then weeks. Margaret stopped leaving the apartment unless absolutely necessary. Her illness worsened without proper treatment. She sold furniture, then dishes, then the small TV Ethan had bought her years ago, back when guilt still visited him occasionally. One evening, she tried to stand and couldn't. Her legs gave out. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, laughing quietly. Not because it was funny, because there was no one left to hear her cry. Margaret typed a message. Not long, not dramatic, just the truth. "I love you. I hope you're happy." She didn't send it. She erased it. Love, she realized, had become a burden. Instead, she wrote nothing. Margaret lay in bed that night, breathing shallow, pain spreading like a slow tide. She thought of all the times she had shown up for her son without being asked, of all the nights she had stayed awake so he could sleep without worry. And she wondered, not with bitterness, but with aching clarity, if absence was the only language left that might finally be understood. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, a mother learned what it truly means to be alone. The neighbor noticed the smell first. Not strong, just wrong. A quiet sourness leaking into the hallway, mixing with dust and old carpet. Mrs. Keller knocked once, then twice. No answer. Margaret always answered, even on bad days. By the third knock, Mrs. Keller was already dialing the building manager. The paramedics broke the door just after noon. Margaret was found in her bed, fully dressed, hands folded loosely over her stomach. Her eyes were closed. Her face was calm, as if she had simply decided to stop trying. The report would later say, cardiac complications worsens by untreated illness and prolonged stress. No emergency call placed, no family present, just a quiet apartment and a woman who would run out of strength. Ethan was in a meeting when his phone vibrated. Unknown number. He ignored it. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, annoyed, he stepped outside and answered. "Mr. Collins?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is Officer Ramirez. I'm calling about your mother." Something in Ethan's chest tightened. She's been found unresponsive in her apartment. The world narrowed. "What do you mean, found?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." Ethan arrived too late. He stood in the doorway as strangers moved through Margaret's home, labeling, photographing, closing. Her bed looked smaller than he remembered, her life condensed into boxes. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before: expired medication, unpaid bills, an empty fridge. This wasn't sudden. This was slow abandonment. Ethan sat down heavily, elbows on knees. "I didn't know," he whispered, but the room didn't argue. Lauren came later. She hugged Ethan, not the apartment, not the memories. "She didn't say anything was this bad," Lauren said carefully. Ethan didn't respond. "Well," she continued, lowering her voice, "you can't blame yourself. She was stubborn." Stubborn. That word again. The favorite excuse of people who weren't there. Lauren glanced at the peeling paint, the worn furniture. "I just wish she'd asked for help properly," she said. Ethan looked up at her. She had asked, just not loudly enough for people who only listen when it's convenient. At the funeral, people spoke in gentle lies. She lived a full life. She must be at peace now. At least she's not suffering. Someone leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "You did what you could. Don't carry this." He nodded. That's what people do when absolution is offered cheaply. But at night, alone, Ethan remembered the messages he never returned, the visits he postponed, the calls he planned to make later. Later had arrived without him. While sorting through Margaret's things, Ethan found an envelope tucked inside an old cookbook. No address, just his name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No blame, no anger, just handwriting that trembled near the end. "I hope you never feel the loneliness I felt. I hope your life is full. I loved you in every way I knew how." That was all I had. Ethan dropped the letter. For the first time, the weight landed where it belonged. Regret doesn't scream. It sits quietly beside you for the rest of your life. Ethan stood in the empty apartment one last time, keys in hand. He locked the door behind him and realized too late that his mother hadn't needed grand gestures. She had only needed to matter. Grief didn't arrive all at once for Ethan. It came in waves so small they were almost invisible. At first, there was paperwork, accounts to close, forms to sign, boxes to tape shut. Lauren handled most of it efficiently. "She wouldn't want this dragging on," she said. Efficiency is useful when you're trying not to feel. Back in their house, nothing looked different. The furniture was the same. The walls were the same. The refrigerator was full. But something fundamental had shifted. Ethan began waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, reaching for his phone. Not to call his mother, to check the time, because part of him kept believing he had missed something important again. Lauren noticed the change. "You've been distant," she said one evening. "You barely talk anymore." Ethan wanted to tell her that every silence reminded him of the one he had ignored. Instead, he said, "I'm just tired." Ethan stopped enjoying the things that once made him feel accomplished. Work promotions felt hollow, compliments felt undeserved. When colleagues spoke about their parents, he excused himself. He began visiting his mother's apartment building without knowing why, just standing across the street, staring at the windows. The building didn't recognize him. That hurt more than it should have. Lauren grew impatient. "You're letting this consume you," she said. "It's not healthy." "I should have been there," Ethan replied quietly. Lauren sighed. "We can't change the past." She said it the way people say, "It's raining," something that happens and moves on. But Ethan couldn't move on because the past wasn't done with him. It happened over something small, a charity envelope addressed to "In Memory of Margaret Collins" arrived in the mail. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Lauren tossed it aside. "You don't have to punish yourself forever," she said. "She made her choices too." Ethan turned. "What choices?" he asked. Lauren crossed her arms. "She chose not to ask properly. She chose to live the way she did." That was the moment, the exact moment Ethan realized how alone his mother had been and how close he was to becoming someone just like that. After that night, something between them fractured. Lauren avoided the subject. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. He began remembering small things, how his mother always waited until he was done talking before speaking, how she never asked for more than necessary, how she said, "It's okay," when it clearly wasn't. Those weren't choices. They were adaptations. Months later, Ethan visited Margaret's grave alone. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets. "I didn't abandon you on purpose," he said finally. The winds moved through the trees. No forgiveness came, because forgiveness requires presence, and he had been absent. Some losses don't soften with time. They sharpen. They follow you into success, into comfort, into sleep. Ethan returned home that evening and looked at Lauren differently, not with anger, with awareness, because now he understood something society never teaches clearly enough. A parent doesn't need much, just not to be forgotten. Ethan started noticing it everywhere. The way people talked about their parents. "She's fine. He's independent. They don't need much." Words used like permission slips. He began hearing them not as explanations, but as rehearsals. The same phrases he had used until his mother became a memory. At a dinner party, someone laughed and said, "My mom calls too much. I barely pick up anymore." The table laughed. Ethan didn't. He imagined his mother's phone lighting up, again and again, until it stopped. Later that night, Lauren asked, "Why were you so quiet?" Ethan answered honestly, "Because I sounded like them once." Lauren rolled her eyes. "You're overthinking this." Overthinking. That was society's way of telling people to stop feeling uncomfortable truths. Lauren began staying late at work. Ethan began coming home earlier. They missed each other more often than not. When they did cross paths, conversations felt careful, polite, like two people afraid of saying the wrong thing. Ethan started realizing something painful. Lauren didn't grieve his mother. She resented the inconvenience of her memory. One night, Ethan finally said it. "I failed her." Lauren looked up from her phone. "Why do you keep saying that?" "Because I did." She exhaled sharply. "You're romanticizing her suffering. She chose her life." That word again. Chose. Ethan felt something break, clean and final. "She didn't choose loneliness," he said. She adapted to it. Lauren didn't reply. Silence filled the room. Not the comfortable kind, the ending kind. Weeks later, Ethan requested unpaid leave from work. People congratulated him for prioritizing mental health. No one asked why grief came late. He spent his days going through old boxes, photos, receipts, school drawings. He found a notebook filled with small, careful handwriting, budget lists, prayer notes, reminders to call him on his birthday. Every page ended the same way. Don't bother him. He's busy. Ethan closed the notebook and cried, for the first time since the funeral. That evening, Ethan told Lauren he wanted space. For how long? She asked. I don't know. She nodded, too quickly, as if she had already adjusted to a version of life where certain people were optional. Ethan sat alone that night, notebook open beside him. He finally understood the cruelest part of all. His mother didn't die when her heart stopped. She died slowly, in unanswered calls, delayed visits, and a world that taught him that love could be postponed. And the worst truth? Society would tell his story softly, but his conscience would never lower its voice again. Ethan tried to bury it. At work, he smiled, attended meetings, responded to emails, but every compliment felt hollow, every promotion meaningless, every conversation with Lauren frayed at the edges. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was accusation, a quiet one that echoed in every empty room, every unanswered call. He went to a brunch with colleagues, pretending he belonged. They spoke about their parents, their weekends, their lives. Mom calls too much, one woman said, laughing. Dad expects too much, another said. Ethan's throat tightened. Every laugh, every dismissive shrug reminded him of Margaret's silent suffering. He wanted to speak, to tell them what real absence felt like, but no one wanted to hear it. They only wanted excuses. At home, Lauren brought up moving to a new city for her career. You've been distant anyway, she said. I don't see why staying here matters. Ethan wanted to scream. Instead, he nodded. He had no fight left for a life that no longer existed. And yet, something inside him stirred. Something Margaret had always carried quietly, steadfast presence, the kind that leaves traces long after it's gone. Their fights became silent, not explosive, not angry, just two people orbiting grief and avoidance. Ethan realized the unspoken truth. Lauren didn't love his mother. She didn't want to. And in loving only convenience, she had become part of the world that abandoned Margaret. Ethan felt that same world closing in on him. It was during a local charity event. Ethan was called to speak about community service. He smiled, nodded, began his speech. But the words stopped halfway. He looked at the audience, then at the microphone, and he spoke. I want to talk about absence, not the absence of opportunity, not the absence of comfort, but the absence of care. My mother, Margaret Collins, raised me with everything she had, and I failed her. She wasn't sick because she wanted to be alone. She didn't stop calling because she wanted me gone. She adapted to a world that never noticed her. The room went silent. No one moved. And for the first time, the weight of neglect became visible. After the speech, Ethan returned home to an empty apartment. He no longer expected comfort from Lauren. She had already become part of the society that ignored the quiet suffering of the people who built them.
but he felt something else. A spark. Not forgiveness, not release, awareness. Margaret had taught him one final lesson. You cannot undo the past, but you can live in its shadow consciously. Ethan finally admitted it. Life was not about moving on. It was about reckoning. And reckoning doesn't wait. It doesn't ask for permission. It arrives, quietly, like Margaret's absence, and leaves a mark that no amount of wealth, comforts, or time can erase.
Ethan didn't notice the slow erosion of his life, not until the day everything broke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a storm. It was quiet, like Margaret's absence had been. Lauren called him in the morning. "I can't do this anymore," she said. Her voice was flat. "Your grief, your obsession, it's consuming everything." Ethan stayed silent, because she was right. By afternoon, Lauren had packed her things. No argument, no shouting, just the quiet removal of a life that no longer fit with his. Ethan watched from the doorway, everything familiar slipping through his hands, like sand he could never hold. And suddenly, he understood. He had been abandoned once, slowly over 20 years. Now he was watching it happen again, this time to his own life. Ethan withdrew from work. He stopped attending social events. He couldn't smile. He couldn't lie. But the world didn't wait. At a board meeting, he lost his composure. "Do you have children?" one executive asked casually. "Yes," Ethan said. "My mother raised me alone, and I failed her." A silence fell over the room. He continued, "She adapted to neglect. She loved quietly, and I ignored her. I ignored her for years while the world told me it was okay. It wasn't okay." People shuffled uncomfortably. Some left the room. Some whispered. The man who had once been calm, composed, successful, was now vulnerable in front of the world. And it was exactly how Margaret would have wanted him to see reality. That night, Ethan returned to the empty apartment where Margaret had lived. He opened her old desk and found the letters she had never sent. Pages upon pages of careful thoughts, love, guidance, quiet instructions for life, and warnings. "Ethan, life will offer you choices. Some you will take for granted, some you will ignore. But always remember, your presence matters more than your words. I will love you quietly, always. Don't let my absence teach you to be absent to others." Ethan wept uncontrollably. He had read them too late. The next morning, Ethan walked to Margaret's grave. He knelt, not to beg for forgiveness, not to cry for what was lost, but to witness the weight of his own neglect. He whispered, "I understand now. I see what I lost, and I see what I allowed to break." The wind moved through the trees. The grass swayed gently, and for a moment, he felt the quiet power of Margaret's life and the consequences of ignoring it. Ethan returned home. He looked at Lauren's empty side of the bed. He looked at the house that felt bigger than it should. He finally understood. Some absences cannot be fixed. Some losses do not forgive. And some parents, though they love you completely, leave marks you cannot erase, marks that shape every decision, every regret, every failure thereafter. He sat in silence, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. And in that quiet, he felt the weight of a life that should have been remembered. Margaret's life, her sacrifice, her love. And he finally understood the cost. The world would continue, indifferent as always. People would forget, move on, live comfortably, but Ethan Collins would never forget. Not the absence, not the neglect, not the mother who raised him with everything she had and left quietly when the world refused to notice. Some absences are louder than words, and some love is felt only in the silence left behind.